Hello everyone and welcome to the Governance Update, the last one for the year from VLGA Connect, and joining me as always is Steve Cooper. Steve, you look a bit confused, perplexed. What's wrong?
Oh, it's the last one for the year, Chris. It has been a big year.
You're a bit tired, are you? A bit tired and emotional or something?
No, I just thought maybe we could be a bit better and you like sort of mark the occasion.
Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, like go to a bit more effort.
Well, just for once in your life, Chris.
Well, we probably need John. It's a bit late, Steve. You say this now. John, have you got any magical effects? I'm talking to John in the studio that can transform us perhaps into something more appropriate for an end of year discussion. Let's see what he can do. Goodness me, that's a change. That's very impressive. Oh, Stephen, you look very smart.
And you too, Chris. And looking at your background there, I just so didn't know you cared.
Well, I only cared about your shoulder, as it turns out, by the looks of that. See, there's your shoulder. But, you know, the lovely Liddy and Catherine, pride of place on my Christmas mantelpiece.
Oh, who knew, Chris? Aren't you a little surprise packet?
Indeed. Oh, goodness. The effort we go to for the, 90 or so viewers that we get for this on a weekly basis, plus those who listen, of course, who've got no idea what we're talking about. Thanks for bearing with us. Steve, this is our year-end edition, and as you rightly pointed out, we needed to go to a little bit more effort than we normally do. What do you think of when you look back on the year of 2020 with a governance lens?
Crikey, Chris, what has happened in 2020? I suppose you have to start with COVID and the fact that we've been impacted through the year. You know, we started the year in January and there was a bug in China and it might affect us, but then obviously by February, March, there was, you know, I recall that in 1 week, I think it was Darebin and Moonee Valley closed their offices, and there was still a sense of, was that a bit over the top? But it was a portent for things to come.
On that, Steve, I've heard other CEOs, Andy Diamond's one at Monash, talk about the symbolism of closing the doors to the public. It was a big step to take, wasn't it, for councils?
I think that's right, Chris. And when we talk about leadership, sometimes councils have to act ahead of where community sentiment is. And I think Andy's quite right. It was a huge step because of the fact that there was still not an awareness of how serious this virus was.
So let's do a little trip through. There's a couple of bits of news this week, which we'll talk about at the end, I think, Steve. But let's do a little trip back down through 2020, because when you think about it, there's a lot has happened. It feels like we've packed 3 or 4 years of events into one, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Keep going, Chris. Let's go through.
Let's go back. COVID hits. Let's not forget at the time the new Local Government Act was coming in, and we probably thought at the start of the year that was going to be the big thing that would impact on how we face 2020 in local government.
Well, I think that's right, Chris, because certainly in the governance space, there was an awareness of what might be in the Act and a bit of pre-planning, but until that Act received royal assent went through the Parliament and then received royal assent on the 24th of March, nothing could be done with certainty. But of course, once that was enacted, we had some immediate implementation of the principles, or the principles came into effect, and then a raft of work to get through that first tranche, the governance rules and some policy work by the 1st of September.
Yes, and I think it's probably fair to say, Steve, that whole thinking around what is a principles-based act, what is it going to mean for us as opposed to how we've operated in the past, didn't really hit home for a while, did it?
No, and I think that change in mindset was a while coming too. That my sense was that Local Government Victoria were thinking, look, it's a principles-based act, we'll do some work, and the sector will be able to pick up on that. And there were really calls through April and May from the sector for guidance material. So what you saw was a bit of and I'll say it for the first time, but possibly not the last, a pivot by Local Government Victoria in this case, that the Engage Victoria website also included what they were calling pathway material. So guidance material, but still in the context of a principles-based act, which sort of left the final decision to the individual councils as to what they adopt, providing they achieve compliance.
And of course, while all this is happening, while people are coming to grips with what that means and the early requirements of implementation, COVID is bubbling away, more than bubbling away. It's impacting us everywhere. And the spectre of elections is there at that point coming in October. Hard to think about it now, but it seemed for so long there was just this uncertainty about how it was going to play out.
Yeah, will it, won't it? What section of the Act is at play? Who gets to make that decision? Obviously, the minister. The minister has some powers, and certainly the election was always going to be impacted by COVID. And I was thinking too, particularly through August, September, when the lockdown was in effect and candidates were wanting to get out and do the things that candidates normally do, you know, go to civic events or go to events, door knock, press the flesh, and it wasn't possible for them to do that. So, but always with a sense that it was most likely that the election would continue.
And of course, lest we forget, around July, I think I might be slightly off, we had a change of minister. And of course, that took quite a bit of attention around the sector at the time too. What's the new minister going to do? What's he going to be like? How is that going to impact on the rollout of elections, if they indeed happen?
Isn't it one of those things too, Chris, where, and certainly Minister Lean has a different style to Minister Somyurek in terms of engagement with the sector. But ultimately, you have a person occupying a position where they're a minister of the Crown and they are oversighting the decisions of government. And I thought one of the really interesting things from Minister Lean, despite the fact that his style's a bit different, was an ongoing commitment to the decisions of government. You know, in terms of things like, say, for example, single-member wards that might have been controversial, there's been no sense at the moment of walking back from those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely right. So a whole range of other things are happening. Perhaps if we just play out the election piece for a start. So elections continue under COVID conditions, declared they'll all be conducted by post. And then the big talking point really was, how is that going to impact on trying to achieve a better balance in terms of gender, particularly, and the fairness of people being able to campaign effectively and equitably through that period. Of course, the end result was pretty good.
The end result was great. So we got up to 44% women elected, women in all councils bar one, a really good proportion of women subsequently elected by their peers as mayors and deputy mayors, pretty much proportional to their representation across those elected positions. So ultimately a good outcome. I think, Chris, too, whether an election is postal, face-to-face, in a COVID environment, there is always an element of wash-up that involves disappointment. Unfortunately, I mean, we're not in a situation where they are in the US where there's that sort of extent of legal action. But I think we should remind ourselves that what was the Court of Disputed Returns but is now VCAT always has some activity post-election because people are disgruntled with the outcome, and due process would say that if there is a valid issue, it should be aired and dealt with appropriately.
I think fair to say other jurisdictions have taken disgruntlement with election outcomes to a far new level. Nothing like that has played out, thankfully, in Victoria in council land, but they really were the social media elections, weren't they? And there's some observations there, I think.
Yeah, before we go to social media, Chris, on that point about follow-up though, I mean, there is a rich tradition in some councils of, you know, what they used to say, vote early and often in bad old days. And hopefully we've done a lot to get over that. But we should also be mindful that the VEC have referred a matter to VCAT for investigation in terms of an allegation of vote tampering at the Moreland City Council. And
yes, of course. I'd forgotten
and
that
matter
actually.
is, yes. And that matter is playing out at the moment. So, like, my sense of that is that's terrific, and we should take a great deal of comfort from the fact that where the VEC is thinking that the outcome of an election may have been impacted, that it should be thoroughly investigated. So Good work.
Indeed.
Social media.
So,
Yeah, I don't know, Chris. I think it's a similar topic that, going right back through history, there has always been, elements of naughtiness associated with the conduct of elections. This is only my theory. Someone could do a PhD on it, perhaps. Maybe social media removes some of those inhibitions, and people think that what would otherwise not be okay in terms of disrespectful conduct is all right on social media. But there have been some pretty disturbing reports of trolling and threats and so on.
it's that really keyboard warrior thing, isn't it? Where you just feel empowered to do what you probably, I would hope, wouldn't do face to face with someone.
Absolutely. And I think the really insidious part of that, Chris, is if people are dissuaded from standing for public office, which we should all honour, then we're all the poorer for that. The community is best off when the best people put their best foot forward, and we'll get the best outcome.
Steve, I think that's a really good summary of that electoral side of things and the legislative side of things. The other theme for me that's come out of the year is the integrity side of things, not so much the involvement, but the issues that the integrity agencies have been mindful of, some of the reports that have come out, even right up to this week, which we can touch on in a moment. Would you agree that's been a theme that's really been bubbling away for the entire year through the sector?
Oh, absolutely, Chris. And I think we've talked before that it's really challenging for anyone working in the sector, whether it's the elected, the council staff and executive, or the community, to stay across the issues raised in these integrity agency reports, because sometimes it's not the headline item alone, but there are elements of culture that are drawn out in those reports that we should all be alert to. And in terms of being our best selves, making sure that we actually profit from those reports in terms of delivering better organisations, better outcomes for community. So they really deserve an airing and looking into. Where would you like to start?
Well, I think let's do it around themes. So you think about the report into Ballarat Council earlier in the year, which was around recruitment and procurement and credit cards. Those themes have come up a couple of times. I think there was another credit card issue at another large regional council. Learnings from those might be a good place to start.
I think so. I thought, and we've talked about this before, Chris, I thought in fact, if we talk about Ballarat and gold mining, the nuggets in the Ballarat report were around those other elements that you've touched on. Recruitment was the headline and is certainly an issue and went to culture. But there were some interesting elements around contract management, around transparency and scoping of contracts at the start, around the relationship and the role of councillors in the operations of the organisation, that really bear thinking about. And those elements provided an environment where the Ombudsman felt that she should follow through and report on the organisation. So sometimes the element of what's reported on might only be the symptom of a deeper cause.
And parking fines came up a bit, if I'm not mistaken.
Did it ever? A couple of times. In fact, the first one was an interesting one in the sense that as a result of an Ombudsman's report in relation to the use of contractors for the consideration of appeals, a number of councils refunded amounts, running into the millions of dollars because there were issues associated with the delegations. And I actually, just by way of disclosure, I should say that I did manage the enforcement function at one of those councils at that time. So I'll just put that out on the table. The other one, Chris, later in the year was a report by the Ombudsman in relation to parking fine appeals at the City of Melbourne, where people who had incorrectly, as I understand, inserted data into the parking machine and then received a ticket, appealed on the basis that they'd misread the instruction or not followed the instruction properly. And the cancellation guidelines of the council were that the fine is still payable. The Ombudsman found that, which ombuds people do, that there's also an element of fairness, that if the person had in good faith paid the parking fee and was able to attest to that, that maybe justice is served by not following through with those infringements.
All right, Steve. I think we probably need to draw a line under 2020 as much as we can there in terms of reminiscences. But just as of this week, we've had a couple of reports from VLGA that bear mentioning, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more particularly about the report into sexual harassment across the local government sector. 11 or 12 recommendations coming out of that, which we need some time to unpack. Have you had a chance to look at least at high level at what's coming from there?
I had a quick look, Chris, and I think the telling headline, if you like, from the VLGA report on sexual harassment in local government was that approximately 10,000 people responded to the survey request. 28% of those who responded reported that they had been subject of some form of sexual harassment in the past 12 months, but 2% said that they had actually reported that. So I think at a high level, what we're saying is that there are cultural issues, and this is the same for every organisation, Chris, about what can be done, A, to minimise or in fact eliminate that sort of occurrence, but also to create an environment where people feel psychologically safe to report. This absolutely goes to culture. And I should actually quickly say, Chris, I don't think, in fact, the councils that were, from my brief reading, the 5 councils that were subject of that report came out reasonably well and were a reasonably representative sample of the wider sector. So there was nothing in particular at those councils. I think these are more systemic issues.
I think the point's well made that there were 5 councils that were audited, if you like, but there was a broad survey right across the state from which a lot of those findings are obviously coming from. Exactly.
Yeah, well put, Chris. And so in that sense, look, for me, this is about culture. The recommendations, I guess, sit in 4 categories. Get better data, take some steps around prevention of the issues occurring, step up reporting and provide an environment, and I can talk about that in a minute, where people are more able to report, and some quite specific recommendations around training for counsellors. So on the reporting topic, I think it goes back to that psychological safety. Why don't people think that they can report? Well, the report found that those who are subject to sexual harassment are more likely to be less powerful people in the organisation. So it's easier for them to be targets. Why don't they report? Well, they're fearful for their career. They're fearful of being ostracised within the culture of the organisation, or there may well be a story going around of someone who reported previously and, well, we know what happened to them. So
speaks to that cultural safety that exists or doesn't exist in an organisation, doesn't it?
Solve that, and you probably go a long way to solving bullying issues more generally. You create an environment where fraud and corruption is less likely. You provide a better organisation that's more likely to be an employer of choice, and ultimately you deliver better outcomes for the community. So there's an element of this that's about doing the right thing, but there's actually just better bang for buck for everyone.
Look, I think, Steve, it's arrived at an unfortunate time, really. A lot of people aren't going to have time to dig into this just at the moment. But the flip side of that is perhaps the Christmas New Year period gives us some time to read it properly, reflect on it, and I hope have some more conversations about this. It'd be great to talk to Andrew Greaves back on VLGA.
I think so. Chris, the other thing too that people might not have noticed was at the same time that report dropped, there was one called Systems and Support for Review of Principal Performance. So the Department of Education.
So as in school principals.
Exactly.
Yes.
The Department of Education school principals have a system for review of principal performance. And I did peek at that and thought, gee, there's some great lessons in that report in terms of the review of performance or performance management, if you like, of council CEOs.
Can we perhaps hold that one for another discussion? Because I think we could probably spend a bit of time on that as well, both of those topics, perhaps in an early New Year edition of the governance update. I think
And
we've exhausted everyone today, Steve,
we
with this
probably
one.
have, Chris, and they'll all go away at Christmas time now and read that report too. So we'll be better placed to do that discussion.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, thank you, Steve. Great to go tripping down memory lane with you. Great to have you on my mantelpiece, your shoulder at least. I hope you and your family have a terrific Christmas, a safe, happy Christmas and New Year, and thanks for being part of our governance update right through the year.
Thanks, Chris. Same back at you too, and to all our listeners. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus. However people celebrate this time of the year, may it be a safe and happy time. Thanks, Chris.
Indeed. Season's greetings to everyone. Thanks for watching. Look forward to having you with us in 2021 on the Governance Update here from VLGA Connect.